friends, this is Ranger Amanda and I'm here at Soldier's Delight Natural Environmental Area, and this is such a special place not only for the geological formations that are here with the serpentine bedrock, but also because it's one of Maryland's largest natural grassland areas. And most recently, another thing that's making it really special is that it recently had a wildfire here. So we're going to take a look at some of these burned areas, and we're going to discuss the ecological significance and the impact that fire can have on an area, both good and bad. And so let's go ahead and take a look. All right, friends, so right off the bat, we can see that a fire has ripped through here. The forest is blackened with evidence of a fire. We see charred logs, charred trunks, charred soil and leaves on the ground. Just your classic signs that there was a fire here. The other clue is that it smells like a campfire. I mean, the smell is really strong. The fire was 3 weeks ago and it still smells like a freshly doused campfire. And so as I was approaching the trail before I even got to the area that got burned, I could smell it. I knew it was coming up. And you might look around and you might assume that everything that the fire was through died. But that is not the case. Although the fire does kill off a lot of things and incinerate a lot of that debris, it's not necessarily a death sentence for the plants that live in this area. In fact, a lot of the trees you see behind me are green, which means that they're still alive. And if I come over here, I'm gonna twist you guys around with me. I have a tree, and a lot of trees are showing this evidence of black right here, showing that they got charred. But the tree itself is still perfectly healthy. Because that bark is like a coat of armor for the trees. It helps protect them when wildfires go through. It's very thick, and a lot of times it will take the damage. So the bark is taking the damage, but the inside, the living parts of the tree are still safe and they're still alive. And so even though that tree might have a little surface damage, it's still healthy. Those roots are still healthy, and that tree is going to continue to live in this area. So when we think of wildfires, we often think of all the negative things associated with a wildfire. But wildfires can be very important for the ecological health of an area. Some species of trees actually require fire in order to germinate their seeds and make another generation of plants. So trees like pine trees or conifers, cone-bearing trees, they require that fire cycle in order for their seeds to get out of the cone and to germinate into the soil. And that is really important that they go through that fire cycle, because if they don't have that fire, the next generation of plants is unable to propagate and grow. And what ends up happening is the diversity of the area changes because other trees that don't go through that fire cycle end up encroaching on that area and outcompeting and basically pushing out that special species. So it is really critical that some areas do naturally go through wildfires. And a lot of times in areas where we can't allow that to happen, we might have prescribed burns, which is a controlled way to burn these areas that require the fire for seed germination. So we have our pine trees here. And even though they have a little bit of surface damage, we can see that the needles got cinched. That's okay. Just a surface wound, it will recover. The cones that are part of it, what they're going to need is they're going to need that fire because the cones are kind of sealed up. And when the fire comes through, that heat kind of pops open that cone and the seeds are able to get out of there. And these species are really important for an area, again, for the biodiversity, but also for the wildlife. A lot of birds and other animals do require pine trees and their evergreen characteristics to live in, to nest in, to have predator protection. So it is really important that when necessary and when required, the area is allowed to go through that fire cycle, and that fire helps keep the area special. It keeps the biodiversity up, and it actually is beneficial and healthy for it to go through that fire cycle. So wildfires are not necessarily bad and can be
really important for an area to grow and maintain its special characteristics and its biodiversity.
Not all fires burn the same. In fact, what the fuel load is made up of is going to affect the characteristics of how it burns. So when we're talking fuel load, we're talking about what is actually burning in that fire. So when we're looking at natural areas, we're looking at logs, we're looking at leaves on the ground or duff, we're looking at the trees themselves, and even looking up at the branches and leaves, those are part of the fuel load. And so when we're looking at Soldier's Delight, it's a large grassland area. So the fuel load is going to be grass, which is very quick and very fast. That's how it burns. And if we look around, we do see a lot of logs on the ground. So there's a lot of heavy fuel sources here, but they actually didn't get burned. This fire moved so quickly through it that besides a surface burn, it didn't actually penetrate any of the heavy fuel loads. So we can see that if we look at this log, it is burned on the surface up and down, but it is not burned all the way around, and it is not burned all the way through. In fact, if you move away the charred layer, we see that the decomposing layer underneath is unaffected by the fire. So that is pretty interesting that the heavy fuel loads did not ignite because this fire was moving very, very fast. This tells us a lot about how quickly the fire is going to move, the characteristics. It's also going to affect how the wildland firefighters would approach controlling and containing this fire and trying to put it out. And so these characteristics, these fuel loads, how it burns, it can really tell us a lot about the area. It can tell us what was the primary species here. So again, fast burning, fast fuel grasses, and how it burned, and that's pretty amazing. So so our heavy fuels are here. Just a little surface burn, just a flesh wound. So earlier I talked about fuel loads and how that can impact how slow or how fast a fire is going to move through an area. And if we look at the landscape, we can see that this is primarily grass. And grass is a very quick burning, fast moving fuel load. And this area a couple weeks ago was very dry. So it had been covered in dry grass. And so once it got a spark, it just took off. That wildfire took off and it just went through this area very, very quickly. We can see what was left behind with the blackened areas, but we can also see the recovery process that is happening within just a few weeks. We can already see a lot of grass and plants coming back, and in a couple weeks, this area is going to look like a wildfire never happened. And you might only be able to tell by looking closely at the trees or in the understory of the forest. But here in the grassland, it's going to quickly recover. I think Smokey said it best. Only you can prevent forest fires. And that's absolutely true. By following leave no trace principles, having your fire in a designated fire ring, following local burn regulations, you can absolutely prevent a forest fire. Because no one intends to start a forest fire. But that spark gets away and it ignites the fuel load. And before you know it, the fire's out of control and you have yourself a forest fire. Those fire ratings are there for a reason, and it's really important to pay attention to them. In this particular case, this forest fire was started by man-made means. And luckily it was put out fairly quickly, but still 700 acres was burned. Now, many areas don't have thousands or millions of acres to let a fire burn out naturally. And it can very quickly reach residences, municipal areas. So lives can very, very quickly become at risk. So it's really important that we educate ourselves on those leave no trace principles, and we recreate responsibly, and that we pass down that responsible recreation ethics to future generations so that everyone can enjoy the outdoors safely. This is Ranger Amanda signing off. Seek adventure, discover beauty.